With more than half of India's population of 1.3 billion being below the age of 25 and with 250 million people entering the workforce every year, rapid growth in India is already seen. This rapid expansion of the workforce generally leads to one of two outcomes. Managed poorly, it can strain an economy and lead to higher unemployment. But managed well, a large talent pool can contribute towards growth and development. For any nation, the bet is on the latter. Despite the emphatic stress that is laid on education and skilling in this country, there is still a shortage of skilled manpower to address the mounting needs and demands of our economy. So please join us today in this unique India Skills Forum as we focus on enabling nation building through employability, empowerment, and ensuring delivery. To moderate this session, I would like to invite Mr. Sameer Sharma, Senior General Manager CSR at Dalmia Bharat. Mr. Sharma has been working in the social development space for the last 20 years. He has a blend of experience of working with large NGOs like BHAI and multinational and national manufacturing industry like Ambuja Cements. He is a postgraduate in social work from HP Universities and is also a certified CII and ITC Sustainability Assessor. Lovely to have you join us, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you so much, Yamini.
Our first speaker for this evening is Dr. O.P. Goel, Senior General Manager and Head of the Bosch India Foundation for CSR and Skill Development. During his 30 years of a career in the corporate world, Dr. Goel has worked in different business management roles, and he has set up and headed the Bosch Salesforce Training Academy for the Asia Pacific region before taking up his current role to manage the non-profit organization of Bosch India. Dr. Goel also heads the Bosch Vocational Centers at Bangalore, which run the German apprenticeship model and has received several accolades for their centers. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Goel. Our second speaker for today is Mr. Raj Nehru, Vice Chancellor at Sri Vishwakarma Skill University. Mr. Nehru is the youngest founding Vice Chancellor in the country who left his lucrative corporate career to serve the dream of transforming the national skill ecosystem that is on high priority within as well as in the country. A veteran in human capital management, he spent more than 2 decades in various roles and different organizations and started his career with the Indian Army. Lovely to have you, Mr. Nehru. Up next, we have Ms. Meena Shenoy, founder and CEO of Youth for Jobs. Ms. Shenoy is a pioneer in job-linked skilling of rural, tribal, and young people with disabilities from underprivileged families. She set up and led EGMM, India's first state government skilling mission, and then consulted for the World Bank and UN across Southeast Asia. She's now the founder and CEO of Youth for Jobs, which focuses on mainstreaming youth with disabilities in education and in the workplace. In just 8 years, Youth for Jobs has become the largest organization in this space and is a recognized system changer. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Shenoy. For our final speaker this evening, we have Ms. Sagarika Bose, General Manager, Sustainability and Lead CSR at Godrej Consumer Products. Ms. Bose is a CSR and social development professional with nearly 20 years of experience. She has worked with leading development sector organizations, government, academia, and the corporate sector. She's contributed to a range of thematic areas spanning CSR and sustainability, vocational skills, information and technology, and special needs education. Lovely to be hosting you, Ms. Bose. I would once again like to remind all our panelists that this session runs till 1:35 p.m. Please reserve some time towards the end for some Q&A with our audience. Over to you, Mr. Sharma.
Yeah, thank you, Yamini. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, CSR Box, for once again bringing us all together on this platform. Nation building is a multidimensional concept, and it involves the active involvement of the citizens, of the communities around us. And we have seen several projects, who have succeeded, who have failed, just because of the lack of participation of the people or because of the full participation of the people. And today, there are, when we talk about the nation building, there are various facets of it. And amongst the most important is to tap the human resources, how skillfully we can tap the human resources, and we can reduce the social and economic disparity which still exists in the society. And very rightfully someone has said that providing skilling workforce, creating an enabling environment for providing a successful platform for doing the entrepreneurship programs, and a little bit of shift from, or a restructuring of the education sector to shift from the theory based curriculums to the vocational curriculum is the need of the hour. The scope of today's topic is actually very wide, and it will be really very difficult for us to discuss the issues threadbare, but we will try and do justice with the task which has been given to us by Bhaumik and team, and we will stick to our timings to close the session by 1:35. So for the sake of the discussions, what we have done is we have divided the discussions in two parts. The first part of the discussions, where our esteemed panelists will speak more about the design elements of the skill development, the entrepreneurship programs, and the delivery part of it. And, in the later half of our discussions, we will focus more on the challenges and the opportunities, and post that we will try and take the questions of our respected audience. So with this, I will now open up the session, and would like to go to Dr. Goyal, who heads the CSR for Bosch in India. He actually needs no introduction when we talk about the skill development in India and the contribution which Bosch has made, in this space. Dr. Goyal, like I said, Bosch has played a very, very crucial role in skilling vocational education in India. The audience will be very happy to learn, that what are the models of skill development which you implement for different sections of the society, and what has been your experience so far. So, Dr. Goyal, over to you now, please.
Thank you, Samirji. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to my co-panelists. Good afternoon to all the audiences. I just wanted to check, am I audible?
Yes, please.
Before I come to the skilling models which we practice in India, let me take a few seconds to introduce the company, Bosch. It's a German multinational company with deep roots in India. The company does a business of about 77 billion euros, is known for its innovation strength, mainly in the area of automotive technology. This is one company which applies for 13 patents every day. The other differentiator is that the founder decided to give 92% of the dividends coming from all the businesses world over to a charitable organization called Bosch Foundation, headquartered in Stuttgart. We also have, of course, a foundation here in India called Bosch India Foundation. Coming to India, we will be completing 100 years in 2022, a year after now. We have 13 companies and employ about 32,000 people. And now to Mr. Samir's question of skilling, what we do and what models we have. The first model is the apprenticeship model, which is a 3 years long program for those who complete 10 years of their schooling. This is on German model, and we know that Germans are very proud of the apprenticeship system, what they have and which has evolved over decades, which is called as VET dual system, vocational education and training imparted in dual mode, where the part of the training happens in the classrooms and labs and part of the training happens on the job. We brought this model to India in 1961, the same year when the Apprentices Act came into the country, 59 years before. And we practice this in our center here in Bangalore. The center itself has been declared as the best training establishment by the President of India some 54 times out of these 59 years. We also has the privilege of hosting the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, and Dr. Angela Merkel. Both of them came together to see and discuss with us how the Indian youth and the German vocational education system can be combined together for the larger good of these two countries and perhaps the world at large. So this is one model where we run 7 different trades, technical trades, and train these youth on the skills which can be happily called as skills at the world class level, because about 1/4 of our apprentices actually work abroad. Some of them who decided to join Bosch after their apprenticeship program from here have reached to the level of deputy general manager in Bosch. Some of them are now at the verge of retirement. So this is one model, which we call it as long-term career-oriented model of skilling. Second model, we have named it as Bridge, which is an 8-year-old model, which we started in sometime 2013 beginning, which is for those who do not want to go for higher education, and that number in country is very large. We know that in India, about 22 million youth enter class 11th and 12th every year, and the pass percentage is only about 75. So a very small number of percentage of them go for higher education. The remaining one needs skilling, and we are not doing enough, as we all know. So to address this need, we devised this short-term job-oriented model, and we have named this program as Bridge, the bridge between the school dropouts and the entry-level jobs in the service industry in the country. In these 8 years, we have trained and employed 30,000 youth, 466 centers in the country is there where we run this program, and slowly we are making this fully self-sustainable and also a scalable model. The third model is the training for artisans. The country was known for artisans in the past, and we have slowly kind of forgotten, but now we have tried to revive it by setting up centers for carpenters, plumbers, and we also have one for the electricians. So we have 3 world-class centers which we have set up, but now we are creating multipliers, relatively smaller centers in the country through the educational institutes, where we have 20 centers set up. So to summarize, 3 models of training: long-term career-oriented, after 10 years of schooling, 3 years vocational education and training, dual model of Germany. Second, 3 months training for preparing youth for entry-level jobs in the service sector, job-oriented but short-term. The third one is the training of the artisans, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, masons, and others. Back to you, Samir.
Thank you, Dr. Goel. I think you have done a fair amount of research. I must appreciate when we learn that, you know, for different segments you have different set of skilling programs. I mean, that is quite appreciable, Dr. Goel. I'll come back to you in a while with some more questions. I'll go to Mr. Raj Nehru. We are very fortunate to have him with us today. You know, Mr. Raj, more than anybody else, I am very keen to know that you are heading an institute which is the first of its kind, a kind of a skilling university. So would you please elaborate on that how it's the first skilling university and how it is different from the other universities which you are heading? I'm very keen to, you know, learn about this. Mr. Raj, you are on mute.
Thank you, CSR Box, and thank you, Mr. Samir, and all my co-panelists. It's a pleasure talking in this event. The question that you asked, I'll just set a brief before I talk about it. You know, India is one of the fastest growing economies, and so is Haryana. And one of the biggest challenges in this fastest growing economy is that your working age population is constantly growing, almost at the rate of at least 2% every year. And given this huge spurt of working age population in the India, the challenge we on the other side find is that when we see various reports that almost 1/3 of the population do not only match with the skills that are required by the industry. Almost 70% of these youths are unemployable or they are low in their skills. And we know it very well from various economic indicators that if we have to have an economic growth, 2 important things are required. One is what we call increase in the labor force, and the second is that the labor force must be productive. So which both indicate that the youths that we have today who are going to be the strong pillar of economic growth, need to be skilled. So in Haryana, what we did in 2017, when the government of Haryana announced the Skill University, the first thing we did was we did a youth aspiration survey and industry aspiration survey. We connected more than 18,000 youths in the state, and through various face-to-face interviews, digital surveys, and questionnaires we had circulated, along with the industry CEOs and CHROs, CFOs we connected. We recognized certain priority sectors that industry was also talking about, and the pattern of education that people were indicating, youngsters were indicating. And we recognized one important fact, that there is a huge need to align the demand with the mix of theory and practice, which is currently lacking. And that's one of the reasons why we see that only 1/3 is matching with the industry skills. So in order to do that, we had done the industry mapping as a university. And what we did, the first thing was we modified the Sri Vishwakarma Skill University Act, which the government had brought in. And in that University Act, the amendments that the government did was, which we had recommended, was we need to involve and engage industry into it. So if you look at the new act that the Haryana brought out as a Sri Vishwakarma University, you will see the BOSS got changed, then the Skill Council got renamed. Earlier in universities, you have academic councils. We got it changed to the Skill Council. The Skill Council composition also got changed. Now we have got 25 and above industry CEOs, CHROs as the member of this Skill Council. So this was one of the most important thing that we changed. Then the Board of Studies that we constituted had the members of industry, partnering industry. We entered MOUs with them. And the most important thing was that the courses for certification, undergraduate and postgraduate courses that we developed, they were designed and developed in partnership with the industry, partnering industry, and courses were aligned to the requirements of the industry. So today, if you look the courses that we run, whether certification or diploma or degree or post-graduation, the 60% of the component of the curriculum comprises the work inside the industry. So the apprenticeship becomes an important element of the credits, and then the 40% is the classroom theory. So basis on this theory, we made this entire model a work embedded learning model, skilling model, and a modular approach was introduced, along with the flexible entry and exit system. So today, if a student is entering in an undergraduate program in university, if we have a partnership, say with the Hero MotoCorp or Maruti or HDFC Bank or whichever program we are running, the flexibility is that a student can enter in first year and exit after completing that first year successfully without going to the second year. The choice is with the student. Student can exit with a diploma, or student can exit with an advanced diploma. And with industry, we have also mapped every year with a specific job role, which gives flexibility to these youngsters. The beauty is that the student population that we have attracted in last 3 years is that they are largely from the rural background, dropouts who could not pursue because of financial reasons. And that has helped us to create a social inclusion through these programs. And given the general enrollment ratio in the country, this program is now becoming more popular with the industries because it is helping in augmenting their resource requirements. Because the resources who spend almost 1 year, 2 year, 3 years in the industry during the apprenticeship embedded programs, they become aligned with the value and culture of the industry. The last important part in this is the industries are paying them stipend for the period they work in the industry, and thus it becomes a earn and learn model. So almost 10% is the only spend that a student makes. Largely 80 to 90% of the money that a student gets is actually he uses and spends it on his other expenditures, like staying somewhere or consuming on day-to-day expenditures. So this is how the entire model is working. And now with this model, we have also introduced value and communication that's becoming fundamentally important, embedded with the entrepreneurship, because we don't expect every student at the end of the year getting absorbed in the industry. So we are also making sure they learn in the industry. The theoretical inputs are given by the trained faculties from the industry, appointed by the university, and then they have a choice whether to go in the industry or go for their self-employment. And eventually, whatever outcome we have from the university today, it's a job-ready resource that we are working on. Thank you.
Fantastic, fantastic, Mr. Raj. I mean, nothing better than running the courses which are industry aligned, which have 60%, more of a practical on-job training, 40% theory, and on the top of it, it is a kind of an earn and learn model which you have mentioned. Fantastic. And I think it's a worthwhile, and you have to publicize it more. I mean, the practicality aspects of it, communicate more so that the other agencies who are interested in the skill development can learn from this. Thank you so much, Mr. Raj. I was talking to Meera ji the other day, and quite fascinated by her, experience and the passion which she has for working with the persons with disabilities. And I know particularly it's a very challenging task to work with such people and skill them. So, Meera ji, we would like to know from your experience, how has been your journey so far, in skilling the persons with disability, and how do you see the future of it?
Thanks, Samir. Many people don't know that 80% of the world's disabled population is in developing countries like India. So that really is an opportunity for people like us who want to make an impact through job link skilling to work in this area and make a large impact. So our vision when I set it up 8 years back was to ensure all youth with disabilities have access to education and employment opportunities. It's interesting to work in this area also because there's a very close connection between disability and poverty. Most of them are in the vicious cycle of poverty, and 69% of them live in the villages of India, which are completely cut off from markets. So we work with the less educated youth from rural areas to skill them and put them into jobs. Our newer program 2.5 years back is to work with the educated youth with disabilities who are in colleges and universities by an innovative model. We set up something called the Smart Inclusion Centers over there. We also work with about 600 plus companies to help them to make sure that the hired youth is productive and that it helps their business, so that the whole initiative gets mainstream in the company and it's not just a mere tick in the box, which we don't want. So just to give you a glimpse of the challenges of this work, let me just tell you about COVID. What happened when COVID struck us? All our residential training centers for the less educated youth had to close down. But before leaving our centers, the youth with disabilities implored us that they wanted this work to go on, because in this time, they said, all their parents who are marginal farmers will have very little income and they'll be just one more mouth to feed. So we decided to launch Youth for Jobs online. It was really extremely challenging because there's low connectivity, the bandwidth is low. You say disabled is one word, but speech and hearing impaired, for example, you have to run separate batches, you have to have sign language content for them.
Correct.
We talked to all the important stakeholders. We spent days, like what Raj said, talking to the youth themselves, the companies, the parents, just to decide what exactly we should do, because we know dropouts in the online model are high. We didn't want this to happen. And finally, we launched the program. I think what we had not realized was the tremendous interest in the youth to be digitally savvy in this isolated times.
Oh.
The kind of response we had was really stupendous. What was really amazing was that extreme rural areas, Jammu and Kashmir, we had 12 registered with us, which was not even, in our geographical realm before. We didn't have a training center there. Parts of the Northeast, more girls registered from the safety of their homes. Because they live in tiny houses, parents went to them and asked them, and quite often they spoke to our trainers saying, what the hell is happening? Why is he with the phone or she with the phone all the time? And the trainers said what they were trying to do. And very soon the mothers became our best word of mouth ambassadors in the villages. So the market has completely changed. So we had to rework on the market. But I think we did it. And the other wonderful thing, Samir, was that when we spoke to the youth, just to find out, have they lost their jobs? Should we help them again to find jobs? Many youth who had jobs spoke to us, and they also shared their lives, how they are saving money, they're helping their parents, they're educating a sibling. So what had actually happened was that the voiceless now had a voice. And this year, in fact, we are investing. I have 25,000 alumni who are grassroots in jobs over the last 8 years. So this year now we are launching almost like a movement, seeing whether we can invest in the capacities of these youth, all of whom want to give back. That's the other wonderful thing about disability.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to give back.
Meeraji, I just want to interrupt you in between because I cannot resist one question, which is coming to my mind is, how do employers see, employing persons with disability? Is that a challenge you see right now?
I think in India, all are not equal employment organizations, but that's partly because they don't understand disability. You see, unlike the West, we don't have public infrastructure which is accessible. They don't see them, and if they see them, they only see beggars on the road. So I think it's up to us who want this change to happen to sensitize them, to show them that when you hire, it makes business sense. And then how do you do it? You do it through, each time they ask a question, you put in a service. So today, my company team has a whole series of services like sensitization workshops, looking at accessibility, doing job role matrix. There are a whole series of services which we do to make sure that the company, which either begins or its journey of inclusion, is strengthened. And they're really, amazing stories. But yes, you have to work twice as hard. For example, one of the things we're constantly trying to do is to see how can the youth with disabilities be in the front jobs and not put at the back. Because when they're in the front end jobs, they automatically sensitize society. So we did this pilot. We thought, why can't cashiers be speech and hearing impaired youth? Because they're very focused, they don't talk. Many of the retailers didn't agree, and finally one retailer agreed. We did a pilot, it worked. When they did a consumer survey, 97% said they wanted the silent cashier. So today, the successful pilot which we did, I mean, people have forgotten who's behind the pilot, but the fact is some 50,000 jobs have opened up for the youth with disability, which didn't exist before.
Amazing. This is truly amazing work. And I hope there will be a lot of questions which are coming your way. One question I already see, but I will ask you once we'll move into that part. Thank you, Meeraji. Sagrika, who heads the Godrej Consumable CSR, and sustainability part. Sagrika, we have discussed about skill development in this session, models, which Bosch is implementing, and there is one skill university is India's first skill university, which is headed by Mr. Raj Nehru, and we have also seen and talked about the models for the wage employment. Now, we very keen to know how your organization is working on creating the entrepreneurship models in the communities, because that is also one aspect we should touch in this session. So can you please elaborate on this? Sagrika. Yeah.
Thank you, Samir. And thank you also to CSR Box for inviting me to join this panel, and already learning a lot from my co-panelists, and hopefully the questions will also be thought-provoking. At Godrej, it's a well-known name. It's one of the top 10 brands in the country. So really needs no introduction. And also, I think Godrej is fairly synonymous with its philanthropy, the legacy of philanthropy that the organization, the group has. But having said that, I think in 2010-11, we took a much more structured approach to both CSR and sustainability, and put down not just what our goals would be, but what the approach to achieving those goals would be. And in terms of, in one very publicly stated goal was around training 1 million young people by 2020. It was an ambitious target for a group like ours. But we wanted to, invest in it because we wanted to align with the National Skills Mission, which was just coming up around that time, and sort of contribute towards nation building in this way. We follow a shared value approach to CSR and sustainability, and therefore we wanted to invest in trades which are where we can leverage business expertise and sort of co-create, co-design these programs with the NGO partners that we work with. One of the areas that one sector that we focused on was beauty and wellness, given that we are in the consumer products business. In the beauty and wellness sector, we've primarily invested in working with young women, and across the group, now that we are in 2020, we haven't met our target, but because we've been more focused on providing quality training. So we, at the moment, crossed about 6 lakh young people across the group, of which the Godrej consumer products business itself has contributed about 4.3 lakh young people that we've trained. A large number of that, almost close to 3 lakh of that number is the training and the investment we've done in the beauty and wellness space with women. Working with women, we found that while we were very, when we began investments, we were very focused on placement and the employability skills per se. We soon found that there are familial and societal barriers to women joining the formal workforce, and therefore very quickly on we began to realize that we needed to add various other facets to the program in order to allow the women to be able to perhaps start self-employment, to start something from home, and over a period of time that grew into what is now our entrepreneurship program. So I will say that the triggers came just as much from the young women we were working with, their families, the NGO partners that we are working with, as well as our own sort of investment in the sector. And in doing so, we've come up with a very robust and very strong entrepreneurship program that we've developed with our partners. We spent about a year with micro and nano entrepreneurs who are typically earning, when we start working with them, anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 rupees per month, which is their net income. And the idea is for us to be able to increase that by at least about 50% by the end of the year that we work. And this is what we've learned along the lines, in this time, is that entrepreneurship is something that needs a lot of hand-holding. It's not, while the women are themselves starting out, they don't always necessarily see themselves as business owners. So that sense of identity itself needs to be created. And there is a lot of investment that goes in. So it's not just technical skills that we can focus on. We have to focus on life skills, on financial skills, digital literacy, in order to create a robust, rich program which the women can draw value from.
Right. Thanks, Sagrika. This is an interesting model, and I quite liked about when you mentioned that we have invested in the entrepreneurship models, and we are really looking forward to get some maximum benefit out of it. Dr. Goyal, we talked about trainings, in our skilling centers, or continuous training of trainees. But somehow, some of the organizations I have seen, it has happened with almost with every one of us, in fact, that we almost forget to train the trainers. Not forget, but yes, there is a less importance given to that aspect. What do you think, that there should be some central agency, or there should be some kind of an anchor agency who can do the training of trainers, qualitatively, so that they are updated and rightful skill training is provided to the trainees. What's your opinion about this?
Yes, thank you, Samir. I think when we look at the challenges of skilling in the country, the challenge of not having sufficient number of trained trainers and for the right quality, I think is the biggest challenge. From others, we talk about the curriculum not being updated, and somewhere we also lack in infrastructure, etc. So coming specifically on the trainers, on one side we have large numbers in the country. We have 40,000 colleges, very large number of higher secondary schools and the pre-university colleges, etc. Now we also have about 900 universities, including the private universities. So all these institutions have a large number of trainers, but when it comes to the quality and more specific to the skill training, I think there is a very wide gap. We are one of those countries who do not even have a proper qualification framework for trainers. We don't have a master degree in training and development in the country today. I mean, perhaps not even a bachelor degree. So we have entrusted this responsibility in last few years to sector skill council like MEPSC, which is under NSDC. So fair amount of work has started there. In fact, we are also the joint certification agency with MEPSC for the skill trainers, but that's a very small part of it. Coming to what Bosch has done over the years to train the trainers, we have two models here. One model is for training the soft skill trainers for the program like Bridge, what I mentioned, the soft skill training program. So there we offer this train the trainer program in 2 modules, and each one is a 1-week module. Of course, because of COVID, we have now also started offering this training in the online mode. So we have planned to train about 3,000 skill trainers through this online mode. And this is fully funded program of Bosch. We do not expect any trainer to pay anything. Second model is for training the technical trainers. There also we see a very wide gap. The engineers who complete their 4 years of engineering program and want to become technical trainers. So for them, we have a 1-year-long program to teach them everything about the domain, plus also about the delivery skills, evaluation, and all that. So these are the 2 models which we have been practicing. But I strongly feel that as a country, we need to have a proper qualification framework for trainers. Some of the universities, skill universities like that of Dr. Raj Nehru and the others, I think should come forward and introduce some master level courses for training and development. Otherwise, this unorganized or semi-organized sector of skill trainers is not able, we are not able to make the full use of that potential. And I think this kind of a qualification will help.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Goel. I think this is a very important and one of the gray areas of concern. Mr. Raj, what's your take since you are heading this university? I think Dr. Goel made a very pertinent point that if universities like you should have a kind of a curriculum like this for the master trainers, that will be really valuable.
Thank you. I think that's a very valid observation Mr. Goel has made. And see, look, we must understand one important challenge today that India is going through. Every year, you have almost 12 million people entering the labor force. Now, with that entry of more than 12 million people every year, you need to also see where is the capacity that is addressing that. So the current capacity that India has, that as per the reports we see, is not more than 4.5 million. So almost 65% of our youth force is getting deprived of a formal skilling. That is very critical when it comes to. Now, when I say getting deprived, it's not only getting deprived in terms of the skill infrastructure, it is also in the form of the resource infrastructure, which Mr. Goel has been talking about. On the one side, where you have the challenge of the right infrastructure, means you have industry shifting very fast. You know, the way industry has been shifting, moving, technological shift, process shifts, the infrastructure has not been shifting in that pace. So what happens is that we still run the conventional infrastructure, and I have seen it in many places, like Mr. Goel was talking about the plumbing. I'll still, when I go and audit some of the plumbing centers in different regions, I still find they are not aligned with the requirement of a plumber that is in a 5-star hotel or in a large corporate. They still train them and skill them a traditional plumbing curriculum. Similarly, the trainers today that are offering these skill trainings are not themselves trained with the upgraded curriculum. Forget the upgraded curriculum. There is not a systematic, standardized training of trainers module format available today. So in our university, you will not believe, this is the first university in India where we have fought and created a pedagogy department. No university has a pedagogy department. Now this pedagogy department has been created after so much, because in government you have to really fight for these things. We created a capacity building department, a pedagogy department, only to create a framework for skilling our faculties in the institution. So you talked about the challenges. I think besides quality of infrastructure, quality of resources, equipments, I think one important challenge is the skill mismatch. Today, we have got more than 50,000 higher education institutions in India. And now these 50,000 higher education institutions produce almost 4 million youngsters every year only in higher education. Now, when they move out of the institutions, their alignment with those skills that the industry is expecting largely does not meet those requirements. I heard Mrs. Meera talking about the inclusion. See, this inclusion is one of the biggest problems today. If you see the women, their participation rate in the labor force is far dismal. So unless you bring in women into that, and especially when I was hearing she talking about 80% of the people with the special abilities are in India. Now their almost 60% are in rural belts. And then if you have the infrastructure which is not giving the basic addressing the basic requirements, how can you get these people with the special abilities in the rural belts aligned with this? So I think that's a challenge. The opportunity is, I think there is a global demand. Let me tell you, after the corona, and we have been studying the requirements in various countries where we are directly working with, there is a big demand coming to most of the countries. Almost 40-45 million workforce requirement is coming from various countries collectively. India has a surplus resources, but the problem is their alignment with the qualification framework that the global pursues. And another opportunity is national education policy. The way national education policy is now promoting to integrate the vocational education with the general education, I think that is something which we must leverage upon.
Yeah, very rightfully said. Very rightfully said, and very well articulated your points. So the key takeaway from today's discussion would be around this, that we need to really work on developing a core standard model of training of trainers models, and definitely we'll try and bring this talk more about. Meeraji, I am not advocating about your organization, but at the my heart speaks out that there are many corporates in today's event which are participating. So how these corporates can get in touch with you to employ the persons with disability? How they can reach you? And this is one of the questions which has been raised also just now.
You can look at our website, www.youth4jobs.org, and they can get in touch with me, Meera Shenoy at youth4jobs.org.
Right. And Meeraji, what are the challenges which you have seen so far in the employment?
The challenges, Samir,
I mean, particularly is, do you see that there is also a wage discrimination?
Well, generally when they go themselves to the market, there are no jobs, or of course they are underemployed both. For example, especially with the educated youths, some of them, when they come to our classes, we find that we can actually, we put recently one in the management level of the Axis Bank, okay, who came to us and he was working in some small little financial company, because now we've become the voice, till they get their first job and they develop their own voice. After that, they are on their own, they don't need us. So the challenges are, I think, one, the youth themselves are a challenge because education levels are low, most of them are in the rural areas, therefore they are not employable, and their self-confidence is tremendously low because of the stereotypes and myths that exist in society. Second is special educators. I mean, Raj and Dr. Goel were talking about training the trainers. The best of the special educators who get educated by the government, they go abroad, so the worst of them are left behind, and you have to make do with them. So that's another problem. Uh, Definitely, the parents are a problem because, especially in the rural areas, we have a huge program called Village Connect, which works on changing the mindsets of the parents. And companies, as I told you already, they have, either deep unconscious biases or they don't understand disability. So you have to work with them. So I think it's at multi levels. But I want to say what keeps me hopeful always is first is the fact that when the youth gets a job, whether it's a less educated or a educated, because he's been unemployed for so long. I worked for a long time with non-disabled, Samir, but this work is really transformational, okay?
Correct.
And the
Yeah.
opportunity is there because there's an opportunity in skilling and job link placement or enterprise. There's an opportunity in assistive devices because that helps both learning outcomes. So startups can come into that space. So of course, there's an opportunity for companies to hire.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Miraji. Sagrika, you have been building these entrepreneurship models. How challenging is to facilitate people in raising their businesses and that to sustain businesses, and what factors should be kept in mind, for developing the sustainable models. Can you elaborate on this, please?
Thanks, Amit. I apologize. My Wi-Fi is a bit intermittent right now, so I'm not going to switch on my video because that might cause some problems. Right, to the question. Yes, indeed. I mean, many of us are aware of this oft-quoted statistic that 1 in 10 enterprises does not succeed. Then, given that kind of a statistic, how does one actually train for entrepreneurship? And can you really teach entrepreneurship? Someone who myself has, I've been part of a failed enterprise. I honestly don't think you can teach. But does that mean that, what are we doing? Then what is this model about? Entrepreneurship is beyond a skill. There is an attitude part of it. There's a way of being, and there's a way of acting and thinking that we need to inculcate. And that's really what we try to do in our entrepreneurship programs. When we try to work with nano micro entrepreneurs, many of them have come to this work that they're doing because of either familial circumstances, personal circumstances, or societal. They're starting something. Perhaps some of them started as a hobby, some of them start because they need an additional income for their family, and that's what we try to build on. That no matter what you're coming to it from, we of course do a very exhaustive psychometric evaluation of the individual to enable us to provide a customized handholding to them over the period of the year that we work with them. The idea is that we try to help them, one, of course, with basic technical skills, upskilling to a level so that they are at par with the industry best practices. We try to teach them about bookkeeping, about managing stocks and inventories, about how do you attract customers, how do you retain customers, discounts, pricing, packaging, all the usual stuff. But much more beyond that, touching upon what I had mentioned earlier, we work, on this empowerment aspect, which is a little amorphous. How do you put that into a day-to-day program where a non-entrepreneur is hand-holding an entrepreneur and helping them grow their business. And so what we try to do really is to instill a sense of pride in the women in terms of what they do. The fact that they are business owners, that what they're doing is fraught with risk, and yet they do it day after day. That there is a sense of purpose. How do you set a goal? How do you work towards that goal? How do you deconstruct it into activities and work towards it? And it's been especially challenging in a time like this, during the COVID times, lockdown first, and then the way the economy has been performing, at least initially. I think the beauty industry is one of the hardest hit, and it continues to be. The footfall in even your branded, established salon chains has been very, very poor. So the entrepreneurs we work with and the customers and clients they cater to are even worse hit. So how do we help them survive this time? And that's when we went back to the basics. We said we cannot focus on them being beauty entrepreneurs. They are entrepreneurs at the end of the day. They are doing this because it's a source of livelihood for them and their families, and they need to survive. And in order to survive, if they have to move out of the beauty business, so be it, because that is the end game. How do you navigate this time? How do you come out stronger? So we, put in place a variety of activities and inputs during this period. One of the core things during the lockdown itself, for example, was just to offer a helpline so that the women could come and talk to us about some of the problems we're facing. I think we've all seen news articles about the increase in domestic violence, about stress in general in the lives of people. And so having a safe space where they could come and talk through these things, getting advice and help and direction if they needed to escalate matters, was very, very helpful. So that was a very basic thing that we did very initially. And then moving on now, we're trying to help them diversify their income. So if some of them are getting into DIY beauty products, some of them are going into totally different segments like tailoring and catering, based on skill sets. We're offering them zero interest loans in order to be able to invest and create a little kitties with which they can create a new business enterprise and be able to manage this time. So these are some of the things that we have worked on, and we hope that it will help the women navigate and survive this time. Early days, but it looks positive.
Thanks, Sagrika, for this insightful thought. There is a concerned question. Now we are entering into the question answer session as we are left with only 3-4 minutes. So there is a concerned question for you, Sagrika, from Heartcrafted Foundation. And they are saying that, they are working with women to create micro entrepreneurship opportunities, mostly in the skills sector in the rural areas, and have significant impact. So they would like to connect with you in that. So how do they get in touch with you? That's the question actually.
Sure, I'm happy to connect. You can either get my email ID from CSR Box or reach out to me through LinkedIn. I'm usually very prompt in responding.
Okay. There is a question for Mr. Raj from Sushant. He's saying that, we agree on the part of providing hand-holding support to entrepreneurs, but the question is for how long? So can we, develop the people from the communities itself? Sorry, this question is for Sagrika. So can we develop the, entrepreneurs from the community itself and give them the skills? Sagrika?
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what we do. We work with entrepreneurs where they are. So, for example, in the consumer products business, I mentioned we work with beauty entrepreneurs. In our Godrej Properties business, we work with construction related, so typically petty contractors. And when we work in Godrej Agrovet, we work with agri entrepreneurs, essentially farmers, and helping them see the work that they do, because farmers are essentially entrepreneurs. They are risking. I mean, again, I think it's a very topical subject and I will not get into it, but we're all aware of that. So working with entrepreneurs within the communities, helping them identify opportunities within their communities is the crucial bit, because the idea is to help. How do you identify opportunities? How do you act on those opportunities? And I think the other part which is linked to it in entrepreneurship is access to capital. That is a little more challenging. We've tried to find ways, like for example, we are working on things like zero interest loans at the moment, to be able to provide some seed capital to micro entrepreneurs who otherwise, getting access to finance from institutional channels is not always easy for small entrepreneurs.
Right. So there's a common question for Dr. Goyal and Mr. Raj Nehru. One of the audience is saying that, do we have some metrics for quality of education in India, especially in a multilingual landscape? And he's saying that we measure students, dropouts, footprint, employment, overseas employment, etc. But has anyone studied the quantitative aspect of the education skilling program in India? So any one of you can pitch in, please.
Professor Raj, would you like to take?
Yeah, I think as far as the skilling is concerned, there have been a couple of studies. Even if you go and Google, you'll find some very good journals publishing some of the impact studies on various skill-based initiatives. For example, you have Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, you have recognition of prior learning. So these are the two flagship programs that the government of India runs. So I have personally gone through a couple of studies, and these studies indicate that wherever a candidate has gone through a skill-based program, their employability has gone up by 25 to 30%, and their earnings have also gone up by 18 to 20%. So while because the skilling is pretty nascent in India and studies are not very detailed and deep, but some of the studies, which are good studies, they are indicative that the impact of skilling is there. What challenges I have seen is a perceptual challenge in the country today. The perceptual challenge is that skill is considered to be associated with blue collar only. And the perception is that it's a low pay scale, there's a limited growth and less challenging jobs are available, and there's a poor mobility. There is a problem. The mobility, especially the vertical mobility, when someone wants and does a short-term course, what next? Like in ITI, you do ITI, you move to diploma, you move to degree, you move to post-graduation. But in skilling, there is a limitation today, which the government is also trying to figure out through the new education policy. In university, so we are handling it by working directly with industries. What and how to build that mobility by integrating the modular programs. So government has now proposed to bring on parallels like National Skill Education Framework, NSQF, what we call National Skill Qualification Framework. Government is now bringing National Education Qualification Framework, where they will map the NSQF and NEQF together to make the quality of education more visible. Dr. Goyal.
Yes.
Thank you. Rajiv, I have to add one small thing. We have done some studies on the impact, but very simple from the practical point of view. The students who come to the NEET, who come to the bridge program are coming from the NEET category, not in education, not in employment, not in training. So basically they are earning nothing. So through these centers, we have trained 30,000 youth over these years, and the average salary what they get is always above the minimum wages applicable in that state. So that's the salary they get. So we do that calculations. Impact is this youth who were earning nothing are now possibly earning about 100 crore rupees of a salary in a year. So that is more from a practical point of view. This is what is very easy to study. The Excels can help us. What cannot help us in studying, what we have not been able to study is that when this youth who comes from slum undergoes a bridge program and joins a job, his or her siblings also start now looking for higher aspirations in life. They also start now looking for the skilling programs and all that. That is creating a large impact on the society, but that part has not been studied yet. I think a lot more work to be done as far as.
Lot more work to be. I agree with both of you. So there was one question which we will redirect to Meera ji after this session, because there is not much time left, and we are already, we have already exhausted. We are at 1:35. So I mean, has been such an interesting session, and there is so much of work, which is being done in the skill development space, and moreover, after listening to all of you, there is not much for me to conclude, as all our panelists have deliberated very, very clearly on the topic. But I would like to end this session by saying that there is no other charm, than learning from a trainee's, skilling experience and the happy face that she is, earning more than the total household income of his or her family. And skilling perhaps is one sector which has the quickest social return on investment. So there are very good examples of private partnerships which we have heard today, which are happening in our country. Much more to come in terms of developing the right course content for the training of the master trainers. That has been a key takeaway. And as we are evolving, we are learning. So I wish everyone good luck who are involved in the skilling space. And this is the right time to build mutual trust and partnerships of greater scale to achieve the maximum social impact. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, CSR Box, for letting us debate on this topic. Over to you, Yamini.
Thank you very much, Sameer. Very well moderated session, and a pleasure to be on with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sagrika.
Thank you very much.